If you thought the likes of Real Madrid and Juventus were in a bit of a mess financially, just wait until I explain the absolute state of Barcelona's current situation, which in the short term threatens to leave the club without any of its new signings until January. And in the long term, it could lead to a dramatic power shift in both La Liga and Europe, and could spell the end of Messi's career at Barcelona. Now, this has been rumbling on for a number of weeks now, so I try to cover everything from start to finish. I'll explain what the situation means practically for Barcelona, as well as the rest of European football. And finally, I'm going to be a huge smartass and offer an alternative solution and outline what I would have done to solve this huge problem. You know the drill, guys. If you haven't already, do make sure to like the video, do make sure to subscribe if you're new. If you aren't new, do make sure to share the channel with someone you know. We're now nearly a quarter of the way to our first milestone of 1,000 subscribers. Let's get it. Very brief history before we dive in. The financial picture we see today was largely painted by the mistakes of the previous Barcelona administration, and the cracks genuinely started to appear following the sale of Neymar. He was to be Messi's heir, but they couldn't hold on to him. The club received an obscene amount of money for Neymar, £200 million, so it was essential that money was invested wisely, whether back into the playing squad or into infrastructure improvements, since the new camp is in dire need of a makeover. But what did Barca do? Panic. Out of desperation to replace Neymar's star power, in the same month, Barca spent a whopping £135 million on a 20-year-old Ousmane Dembele, whose market value at the time was less than £30 million, and has since suffered multiple injury issues and has never really looked like the player Barcelona originally bought. Following transfer window, Barcelona spent £146 million on Coutinho, whose market value was £80 million max. These two have been relative failures for Barca, and Barca didn't learn the lesson. They then proceeded to buy Griezmann for £117 million, and the effects of these failed transfers are still being felt today. The club racked up debt as it continued to borrow money. The COVID pandemic gave Barca some breathing room, as the league deployed some leniency in the economic turmoil, but that ship has sailed, and the league have since dropped that lenient approach, leading us to the situation we are in now. So, fundamentally, what's the problem at Barcelona? The short-term issue for Barca is La Liga salary cost limits. It's totally separate to financial fair play, and there is no equivalent in the English Premier League. So I'll quickly explain the differences between the two. Starting with FFP, this is a retrospective process. In short, you breached FFP if you don't break even on your accounts, or if you go over the permitted limits FFP allows. So if after the end of the 2021 season, a club's total outgoings are £200 million, but the club generates revenues of £210 million, then that is a £10 million profit, and the club is not in breach of financial fair play. La Liga's salary cost limits, however, work the other way round. They work prospectively, not retrospectively. The league will analyse every single club before the season starts. They'll assess company accounts, contracts, debts, investments, liabilities, and more, and then it'll arrive at a permitted salary cap that the club must adhere to. So basically, if your club's in a healthy, strong position, then you're going to have a higher salary cap limit, whereas if your club is in a weak, unhealthy position, then you're going to have a lower salary cap limit. And because Barca's in an unhealthy financial position, La Liga's determined Barca can only spend £138 million on players for the upcoming season, and that accounts for both transfer spending and wages. To put that in perspective, Barcelona spent £146 million on Coutinho alone a few years ago. So considering this £138 million limit applies to both current wages and total transfers, that is a huge constraint on Barcelona. In fact, Barca's salary cap just 2 years ago was around £600 million and 4.2 times more than the current limit. It might actually leave Barca in a situation where Atletico Madrid can spend more than them. What's also hindering Barca is its existing player liabilities, which further constrain the amount Barcelona can spend. Around £130 million of the £138 million limit is already tied up on the company's accounts for the upcoming season. As I mentioned, current wages make up part of that figure, but there's something even more dangerous Barcelona has to contend with, and that is an accounting term known as amortization. Now, this is going to get quite technical, but it's a really important point, so please stay with me. I promise it will all make sense at the end. In finance, amortization can be defined as an accounting technique used to periodically lower the book value of a loan or intangible asset over a period of time. It's quite similar to depreciation of an asset. Now, amortization can be deployed in a number of relevant scenarios, but for our purposes, and in the context of a football club's finances, amortization means the spreading out of expenses related to assets over the duration of that asset's useful lifespan. So for a football club, and in simple English, this means that when dealing with accounts, a club can split the amount spent on a player over however long the contract was for. So if a club purchases a £50 million player on a 5-year contract. The club's accounts for that year will not show an offset of £50 million, but £10 million. And then in the 4 subsequent accounting periods, there will be another £10 million per accounting year. This is amortization, and it's what most clubs do for tax and accounting purposes. The obvious benefits in doing this is that a huge cost can be spread out over a number of years, in accounting terms anyway, and it can offer greater potential spending freedoms. So, using the Barca cap limit as an example, let's say that Barcelona can only spend a further £10 million in transfers, and if they spend any more than £10 million, they'll be in breach of the cap limit. But they really want that £50 million player on a 5-year contract. Barca can still sign the player, but just assign £10 million to the relevant accounting year, and then the remaining £40 million over the next 4 years. It's sort of like an accounting loophole. So that's the benefit, but there's a real danger in deploying this method, as it relies on foresight and sensible spending, and clearly Barca hasn't demonstrated that, because if you amortize too many transfer fees, you don't leave yourself enough room in future accounting periods. As I mentioned before, nearly £130 million has already been accounted for in Barcelona's accounts for the upcoming season. And of that £130 million, £60 million is tied up in the amortization of, you guessed it, Coutinho, Dembele and Griezmann. So immediately, before looking at anything else, just purely on the amortization of those 3 players, that's nearly half of Barca's total spend limit, and it's taken up by previous lacklustre transfers and basically dead space. To add to this already bleak financial picture, Barcelona's in debt to the tune of over £1.1 billion, and it's also borrowed a further £450 million for stadium development. Now, I have a little bit of sympathy for the current Barcelona board and president Juan Laporta, as the main reason Barca are in the current situation is due to the mistakes of a previous board and president, not accounting properly for amortization, spending too much money on the wrong players, signing off on ridiculous wages and long contracts. But what I have no sympathy for is the way in which Barcelona's subsequently handled the situation. Because Barca, who knew about the severely reduced salary cap limit, instead of tightening the belts, not spending too much, proceed to announce 4 new signings. Aguero, Depay, Garcia and Emerson were all announced despite the obvious limits on their salary cap. And they also made very strong implications they'd be doing everything in their power to re-sign Messi, whose contract expired this summer. Barca even tried to sign Wijnaldum as well, so if they had it their way, there would have been 5 new signings. Emerson cost around €9 million and the rest were free transfers, but they aren't being paid peanuts, they are being paid significant wages, and whilst those wages aren't quite what they were being paid at previous clubs or what they could be earning at other clubs, they aren't negligible, they are still significant, substantial wages. In my opinion, it was totally irresponsible and arrogant for Barcelona to announce these signings, to think they could get away with it, particularly regarding the wages of Aguero and Depay, and that arrogance from the Barca board was punished. The league stepped in and prevented Barcelona from registering any new players, Messi included, until Barca sorted out its wage bill and finances. What also annoyed me was the way in which the Barca president wanted special treatment for Barcelona and wanted a relaxation of the rules so Messi could re-sign for them. In fairness to Javier Tebas, the La Liga president, he stuck to his guns and basically told them to sod off and stated there'd be no exemptions for Barcelona and the rules wouldn't be relaxed. And that makes sense because it can't be one rule for Barcelona and another rule for Athletic Bilbao, because if you relax the rules for Barcelona, then Real Madrid are going to want the rules to be relaxed, and then Atletico Madrid are going to want the rules to be relaxed, and then Bilbao are going to want the rules to be relaxed, and then you get to a situation where all the clubs want the rules to be relaxed, and then there's no point of the rules being there in the first place. As it stands, Barca has to find a way to get its accounts in order before the 31st of August, which is when the transfer window closes. If they don't, then the next opportunity to register the new players will be in January 2022. So we could be facing a situation where Messi, Aguero and Depay won't be playing football until January if Barca can't get their accounts under control. So, what's Barca doing to remedy the issue? Well, £20 million has already been made by selling the following players: Junior Firpo, Todibo, De La Fuente and Trincao. But that's just a drop in the ocean, and it won't even cover the amortization of Coutinho's transfer fee. Even if other Barca fringe players moved on, like Braithwaite and Longley, it still wouldn't be nearly enough. It would make a very little dent in terms of the amounts required. The only solution is for at least one of the bigger names to be sold. The most obvious candidates would be those failed transfers we discussed earlier: Griezmann, Dembele, Coutinho. And indeed, these are the players Barca apparently want to move on. There are, however, many issues in doing this, and it's not easy at all. The first issue is finding potential suitors. None of these players are at the level they were at in early stages of their careers. The total outlay on these 3 players was around £400 million, and now their collective market value is less than £130 million. The second issue is one of fitness. Both Coutinho and Dembele are injured, so it's incredibly unlikely they're going to be able to be moved on in the summer transfer window. Finally, there's the issue of wages. All of these players are on incredibly good wages, particularly Griezmann, who's on a salary of €20 million and he still has 3 years left on his contract. The word from the Griezmann camp is he has no intention of leaving Barcelona and he intends to see out the remainder of his contract at Barcelona. It's also very unlikely these players are going to get similar wages at other clubs, so really there's no motivation for them to leave Barcelona. Another 2 players Barca are desperate to get rid of are Umtiti and Pjanic. In fact, Barca's board was so desperate to get rid of the pair that they offered to rip up their contracts and offered Umtiti and Pjanic the chance to leave Barcelona on a free transfer, which would mean that a potential suitor club wouldn't have to pay a transfer fee for either Umtiti or Pjanic. But like Griezmann, they have years remaining on their contract and are on very good wages, so they don't want to leave. And really, why should they? And why would you? As they're surplus to requirements, we might see a situation where Barcelona has to negotiate them out of the club, whether that involves, paying them off partially and then they go find another club, or selling them to another club and subsidising a large proportion of their wages, as they have done with Suarez at Atletico Madrid. It's really bizarre that Barca has put itself in a situation where it has to negotiate and basically grovel with fringe players. And how do you think they handled this situation? Do you think Barca did it in a calm and reasoned manner? No, this is Barcelona we're talking about. Of course they handled it heavy-handedly. Barca continually leaked information to the press to make the club appear the victim and the players as the unreasonable ones. And of course the reason these players are unreasonable is because they're refusing to forego money they're legally entitled to. How dare you? These players have privately stated how they aren't happy at all with the situation, how they feel pressurised and feel guilty into not giving up their current wages. But ultimately, I don't see them budging. The most likely scenario for me is these players move to another club with Barcelona subsidising their wages for at least the first couple years of that contract. Sergio Roberto is another surplus player and Barcelona's told him he can leave on a free transfer. But it gets even worse. Mateus Fernandes, who's only played 1 game for Barcelona, was told by the club that his contract was going to be terminated by email. Fernandes is now planning to sue Barcelona, and it just adds to the growing list of shambolic decisions that this board has implemented. But it's not just unwanted players where there are issues. Barca has been forced to try and renegotiate existing contracts with some of its key players. Piqué, Busquets, Alba. Piqué's already voluntarily deferred some of his salary for future seasons, and it's hoped that a similar agreement can be reached with both Alba and Busquets. However, nothing has been agreed as of yet. The only confirmation is the Piqué contract. And this is the fundamental problem. Barca has allowed its wage bill to slowly consume the financial health of the club. It's been out of control for years. Curses are like chickens, they always come home to roost. The whole Super League fiasco makes much more sense the more you look at Real Madrid, Barcelona and Juventus' finances. And it makes even more sense that these 3 clubs have still not officially pulled out of the Super League because they're desperate for it. You get the impression Barca was almost relying on the Super League money coming in to save them, but the Super League was defeated, Barca lost. It sounds harsh, but they deserve it. They're facing the consequences of a past board's incompetence, but the current administration is hardly doing any better. And because of this, the club may be forced to sell some of its prized assets. That list includes Stegen, De Jong, Pedri, Ansu Fati and Moriba. Selling these players would generate more than enough money, but that's surely going to be a last resort. But we're forgetting something, aren't we? There's just a small matter of Messi. What's happening there? Will he be playing for Barca next season? Well, as it stands, no. Plenty of work still needs to be done in order to accommodate Messi's salary into Barcelona's accounts. Now, it's been reported in recent weeks that Messi has agreed a new deal with the club, but on 50% of his current wages. That is still a staggering amount. Messi currently earns a salary of around €100 million, so 50% is still €50 million. And he'd still just be behind Ronaldo and Neymar in terms of the best paid footballers in the world. And even then, don't think Messi's doing this out of the kindness of his heart, and don't think he'll let Barca off the hook that easily. That remaining 50%, or however much is cut, will find its way to Messi's pocket eventually. It will simply be deferred to a future date, whether that's Messi as a player or Messi in an ambassadorial role for the club. Unofficially, Messi has agreed the deal, and the only thing preventing the deal from being announced is the salary cap. But this is where we move on to the final point I want to discuss in this video: where Barcelona went wrong, where have they been going wrong, and what I would have done instead. Obviously hindsight's 2020, but I think it was pretty obvious that spending around £400 million on Dembele, Coutinho and Griezmann was a mistake, as was the consistent borrowing and mistakes as to awarding large contracts. If I was in charge of Barca, I would of course firstly try to remove the dead wood, even if that means taking heavy losses on investments. But I never would have signed someone like Aguero. He's a 31-year-old striker, he missed a lot of last season due to injury, and he has a long history of injury issues. And yes, he's earning less than he was at City, but he's still earning a lot of money. Barca removed Suarez for apparently being too old in order to rejuvenate the squad, and they replaced him with a 31-year-old striker. Perhaps most controversially of all, I wouldn't attempt to re-sign Messi. I think in doing this, Barca's making a huge mistake. Now, I completely understand why Barca's desperate to re-sign Messi. He's the talisman, he's the best player in the world. Fans would probably revolt if Messi wasn't re-signed, and he's a huge commercial factor as well. Were Barca to re-sign him, that commercial factor could come into play in terms of the salary cap limits, because the commercial factor would be accounted for, and therefore La Liga might award Barcelona a greater salary cap based on the amount of commercial revenue Messi would bring in. That would allow Barca to spend more money, but I still maintain it's a mistake. By signing Messi, even at 50% of his enormous salary, you're racking up an incredible amount of debt for his deferred earnings, and Barca's already in debt worth over £1 billion. It's very similar to the amortization example we discussed earlier. It's short-term thinking, and it's not accounting for the day when Messi will be demanding the remainder of the money he's owed. And even in the short term, Messi's salary would be a huge burden to Barcelona, and in fact it has been for some time now. As mad as it may sound, I think Barca has to let Messi go and basically hit the reset button. The board should aim to prioritise the youth of the squad in the likes of Pedri and Fati, and invest the money spent not paying Messi into astute signings for the future. Now, would the Barca fans be happy with that? Definitely not. My method would mean Barcelona potentially dropping out of genuinely competing for La Liga and the Champions League for a few years, with the actual aim turning into just qualifying for the lucrative Champions League. But Barca has to accept there will be life after Messi, and constantly delaying the inevitable is only hindering Barcelona from properly evolving. A new era focused around Barca's youth has to be adopted, otherwise Barca will continue to decay, engulfed by its gluttonous wage bill and debt. Europe's elite are already purring at the prospect of poaching some of Barcelona's best players, and if something drastic doesn't happen, Barca, by clinging on to the past and Messi, will lose its best youth prospects as well as its place in the future of football. So that's the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it. This was very in-depth. It took me a long time to research all this and compile all the information for you guys, but I hope it was clear and succinct, and if anything wasn't clear, do feel free to ask any questions in the comment section, and I will try my best to answer them as much as I can. If you've made it this far, then you obviously enjoyed the video, so do feel free to like the video. If you want to see more videos from me, I'm Nobbins by the way, then you do need to subscribe to the channel, and if you are aware of who I am, you're already subscribed. As I said at the start of the video, do just make sure to share the channel with someone you know, otherwise baby channels like me won't grow and won't get very far very quickly. If you don't already know, we also live stream on both Twitch and YouTube, so do feel free to follow the Twitch for gaming streams as well as just some football watch-alongs as well. Hope you really enjoyed the video, hope you have a lovely day, and I'll catch you next time.